Hello and welcome back. We have our sponsors first up with us. We have Brittany Barhite, Strategic Advisor and Internal Communications, and Chuck Gose. I hope I've got that right, Chuck. I'm sure you could correct me if I haven't. Internal comms enthusiast and strategy director. So this session looks at uncovering the real drivers of employee dissatisfaction and the roadmap to a happier workforce. I'm sure we're all going to be intrigued by this. The average person spends over a third of their lives at work, and workplace satisfaction or the lack of it is a common topic of conversation. I know we all talk about this in comms. However, it seems a workforce well-being is now reaching a tipping point, with a deluge of unhappy employees leaving their jobs, being dubbed the Great Resignation of 2021. So let's join Brittany and Chuck as they discuss this new working format and the impact that it has on workers globally. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Sophia. And if our man behind the scenes, Lee, wouldn't mind bringing that up. Thank you, Lee. Hello, everyone. My name is Chuck Gose. Glad to be back here at commsHERO this year. And as Sophia shared with us, thank you, Sophia, for that introduction. We are uncovering the real drivers of employee satisfaction. We'll get into that research in a bit. But Lee, if you wouldn't mind bumping us over to the next. I'm going to let Brittany introduce herself first.
Thank you. So Brittany Barhite, Strategic Advisor at First Up. I help customers with their communication and business objectives. But before I came to First Up, I was at Owens Corning, a Fortune 500 company. And so I bring with me that experience as well. We actually are a former customer of First Up and launched a communications platform to help connect us digitally, which especially helped during the pandemic. So happy to be here for the first time.
Thank you. Thank you, Brittany. And my name is Chuck Gose. It's great having Brittany now be a part of our First Up team of advisors. I'm a strategy director with First Up and have been there now more than 4 years, and of a long time supporter of commsHERO. I love what the team here does with these events. Happy to be a part of this again. So yeah, let's go ahead and dig into a few announcements and housekeeping as we get started into the session. Lee, if you wouldn't mind moving along. So you heard that company name First Up, and you might be like, I've never heard that name before. And it's because we're a new company. Brittany and I were both part of Social Chorus. And over the summer, we merged with Dynamic Signal. So some of you attending, you might be familiar with Social Chorus. You might be familiar with Dynamic Signal. We have now merged our two companies and our First Up. So you'll see that name more and more out there. And the reason we did that is because we're all after the same mission around workforce alignment, making sure employees are communicated with in a way that they want to be communicated with. So thank you all for joining this conversation as we talk about employee dissatisfaction. Next slide, Lee. Oh, and as our two companies come together, we have the honor and privilege to work with a lot of great organizations. Brittany mentioned that she comes from Owens Corning. We have other advisors who have worked for past customers. This is just a sampling of some of the names. Some of you might be on, and hopefully these are all names you're familiar with. But these are the types of companies that have made investments in improving that digital employee experience. Next slide. And a couple things we have coming up that we want you to know about. So October 14th, just 2 weeks from today, we've got our Attune All In live broadcast. Brittany's going to put the link in the chat if you want to RSVP for it. It's just an hour. The link's also there on the page, bit.ly/firstupattune. So definitely would love to see some of you signing up for that in a couple of weeks. We've got some great speakers. If you leave, we wouldn't mind jumping to the next slide. We've got communicators from US Steel and Dow that are part of it, and they're being interviewed by a few of our colleagues and advisors, Becky Graby and Ray Bachnight, and then also Jed Brown, our Chief Product Officer at First Up, is going to be attending. So definitely get signed up. It's just an hour. Know that you'll learn a lot from those communicators. Next slide. And then for First Up customers, so anybody who's a legacy Social Chorus or legacy Dynamic Signal, and partners and interested parties, we're doing some in-person events, which is going to be great. For the last, feels like 2 years, which is an eternity, we've been doing virtual events like these, which has filled the gap. Now we're getting back into doing some face-to-face. I was very jealous of seeing some awards that were going on in the UK and seeing people gathering together. We're starting to get there. in the US, hopefully sooner rather than later. And we've got events coming up. So if you're a customer of ours or an interested party, reach out to us, reach out to your contacts so you can attend an event in New York, Chicago, Dallas, San Francisco, or London. Those are all coming up after our live broadcast. So just wanted to get some of that housekeeping out of the way. Thanks. Next slide. Now, as I mentioned, I was here last year during this, and there was quite a bit of a scene that took place. And Lee, if you wouldn't mind jumping through this build here. You might wonder, like, what happened that caused me to do this and Naomi to do this? And it was mentioned that I talked about how I was a big Duran Duran fan, and Naomi didn't know who Duran Duran was. So in honor of that moment today, I am sporting, and yes, Asif, here's your 80s band reference, my Duran Duran concert t-shirt to celebrate that moment a year ago. Just a fun time. And again, it's great to be back here. And hopefully Naomi has now pulled up some playlists and is now more familiar with Duran Duran. But again, great to be back with everyone. Now let's get into the good stuff. We've gone through our intro spiel here. At First Up, we are dedicated to the world of internal communications, and we are dedicated to providing a lot of great resources. So if you go to our website, you will find a lot of great research, a lot of great resources for you to lean on and share within your organization. So certainly recommend you doing that. And on the next slide, that's where we're going to dig into this latest research that we've developed for the internal communicator. And this is all about the deluge of unhappy workers. I don't know, Brittany, I've done a lot of presentations. I don't know that I've ever done a presentation with the word deluge.
No, I've never used that word before. So it's a new one.
But we're gonna share what this means. That we're gonna share what this deluge of unhappy workers is. And before we get into the data, let's level set here. I mean, it's been a tough couple years for everyone in a lot of different ways. On the podcast that I host, I used to ask people like, oh, how are you and your loved ones doing during the pandemic? And I mentioned that to a guest, not on the podcast. And she's like, you know what? I'd really rather not talk about it because it's not been a good experience for a lot of us. So people have experienced a lot of pain in the last year, but the way to heal is to talk about it. And that's what we want to bring up because we only know our personal experiences. We don't always know what our peers are going through out there. So Lee, if you wouldn't mind just jumping to the next slide. Brittany, this data point blew my mind in honestly how sad this is.
I know. I hope you would notice if I was gone.
1 out of 5 workers felt that if they went on holiday or went on leave, people wouldn't even notice. Now, would people notice? Probably, or we hope so. But the fact that 1 out of 5 don't even feel like their peers would notice, like it's hard to get my head around that one.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And when I saw that stat, I started thinking, how could we as communicators fix that? And I'm not sure there's a large organizational communication strategy behind that. But I do think what you said earlier, some of that's having those open conversations about what people are doing in their personal and professional life and how they're doing that maybe could help with that.
Yeah, I'm just scanning over the chat here. I agree, Helen. Like it is incredibly sad. And I think that it's not as a communicator that maybe we can fix this. It's as a human being we can fix this. Check in on each other. Like ask people how they're doing. And I know we're a bit tired of it's okay to say not okay and all that, but we really do need to check in on each other. And if we see people not showing up or ask about them, because even if they've just stepped out for a day, if people ask where they are, it's a good thing to do. Like, so just check in with each other. Next interesting data point, which probably isn't as a big surprise to everyone that I thought was interesting, is that basically 1 out of 5 again, just don't feel like they're supported in the topics of mental health. Now, I'm going to give my take here first, Brittany. This is probably a dramatic improvement. The fact that people are even talking about mental health and should companies support them compared to, let's say, 2-3 years ago. But companies still aren't doing enough.
Yeah, I'm very passionate about this topic because when at my former company and other lives in communications, we talked a lot about wellness and employee assistant programs, and we found there was a huge gap in employees not knowing about it. So I do think we as communicators could do more to make sure that employees know what's available to help with that mental health. Um, and I think sometimes we all hear, I sent that email and nobody read it, but it can't just be like a one and done about a program or an initiative. So I really think we have to consider how we can personalize those messages, because when something bad or maybe stressful happens in someone's life, that's when they need the information, but they might not know where to get that information. I also think it's equipping our leaders more with that information, because I'll often go to my leader and tell them what's going on in my life. So they might be able to say, here's what's available to help those folks. And I see Allison in the chat sometimes asking, how are you again? Exactly. It prompts that opening up, and a coworker or a leader could actually say, if you're comfortable, here's some resources available if you're familiar. And it's not just counseling, right? There's so many different offerings out there that I think could help people around mental health, childcare opportunities. And so, as I mentioned, I'm very excited about where we could go with this conversation, because I think there's a lot we could do as communicators.
Yeah, we've mentioned that there's a bit of a stigma around
Hmm.
employee assistance programs, and it takes some vulnerability of employees to ask for help. Even in a private setting like that, still takes to do that. One of the most successful things I saw happen in the last 18 months was an organization I worked, about 70,000 employees global. Their CEO posted about what he does for his mental
I love
health.
that.
And it wasn't about the details. It was about, here's what I do for me. Because sometimes it's required a bit of selfishness to say, this is what I'm going to do for me. And that even makes some people uncomfortable. But once that CEO shared that, it kicked off an avalanche of other employees sharing what they did for their mental health. Some was, I go to counseling and things like that. Other people was around painting. Other people
Right.
talked about what they do to help others if they didn't feel comfortable sharing what they did. So it's really sometimes takes that vulnerable leader, that person that steps out and is willing to take the lead on it. Doesn't have to be a leader by title, just that person who steps out and then sharing those stories, because that makes it so much more relatable and easy for others to then share their stories.
I couldn't agree more. And it's not always, to your point, a program. Sometimes it's taking that time for yourself to do those things you need, and leaders walking the talk to make people feel comfortable taking that time to take that walk or that
Mhm.
evening to paint without a meeting. So, no, that's a really good point.
Yeah, you mind moving to the next slide, Lee? So this was an interesting thing, going back to more about the mental health aspect. That what we found, and I'm gonna put on my man hat here, Brittany. When I read a lot of things about work-life balance and mental health, it seems, from my perspective, to lean more toward the female conversation. What we see here is that it doesn't matter. It's a human conversation. The
Mhm.
differences between people, how they identify with their gender and the respondents, is negligible out here. So everybody is struggling in this environment. And so we need to make sure that, my standpoint, we're including everyone into this conversation.
Yes, I love that you said a human conversation. Definitely. And I also found the questions on there interesting, because I started thinking, and if the audience could chime in, what do you need from your employer? Because people were rating that their employer might not be supporting them or giving them time, but interested to see what the audience thinks. What do you think people need for well-being or mental health? Maybe companies aren't doing the right things. Maybe it's as simple as those authentic conversations. I don't know if there's
Yeah,
any other thoughts.
yeah, I think one of the things, Brittany, you and I've talked about is the feeling like you can set boundaries.
Hmm.
Sophia kicked it off with talking about how we spend about a third of our lives at work. Even that phrase has changed with what at work means. And I think that third, we know that there's weeks and months that it's more than a third, because we're not just spending stereotypical 9 to 5 at work. It's starting earlier, it's ending later, it's weekends. It's that those barriers and boundaries have fallen apart for a lot of employees. Where before, what I've seen happen a lot is it used to be like, no, we can't have remote employees. It's impossible. So you have to do your work at work. And then when you leave, but then when you left, you left.
Right.
You didn't have access. You couldn't do things. Well, then during the pandemic, organizations very quickly realized, oh, we have to give access remotely. And now that they've done that, those barriers fell apart for some employees. From my standpoint, I thought I was going to be minimally impacted during this. I've been a remote employee for a number of years. All of a sudden, when the pandemic hit and everybody's like, remote, and here are the 8 tips to work from home and all of that, I'm like, yeah, I get it. Like, I know how to work from home. This isn't, but what I realized was only working from home.
Right.
That was the challenge. You were stuck. And I know that different parts of the world experience lockdowns and restrictions in very different ways. But for the people that were looking after their health, were looking after the health of others, you felt locked down, even if you weren't in a lockdown. And so the last year, a couple years, organizations have changed, but that change and the impact on employees, I don't know that we'll ever really get a good grasp of what that's done to employee health and employee mental health.
I agree. I don't even use the word work-life balance as much. It's integrated into your life, but to your point, finding a way to set boundaries. And I also worked hybrid, and so and then I had, just tell personal story because everyone had their own personal instances happen. I had recently been divorced, so it was like alone from work, alone personally, a lot of alone time, and a lot of COVID communications. And so it was very eye-opening for me as well. And then to your point, I think we'll never quite understand how everybody was impacted and are reflecting on their work and the ways that they work. I remember I saw this kind of funny meme back during that time that said, we don't need more yoga for wellness. We just need a good leader. And I see some people have wrote that in the chat, that it's about that support and approachability. And I love what was said about emotional intelligence is going to excel in having those conversations. So I appreciate those comments. I think we're all spot on with that.
Yeah, much like I have fought against our approach and the focus we've had on employee engagement, I think the same thing has happened with work-life balance. Like you, I think it's a misnomer. I think it's something people are chasing that'll never be there. When all sides want more than you can have, you'll never find balance. So it's more around whether you use the word integration like you did or harmony. It's how are we finding happiness amongst all that? And sometimes you have to look pretty hard to find that happiness.
Right.
But it's there. And sometimes it's just choosing that happiness, but you got to get there. Thank you, Asif, for that. Yeah, it's I didn't know we are going to get this emotional
No, I could.
doing it, Brittany. It's good. This is good. Next slide, Lee, if you don't mind. So this is an area that communicators can have an impact. And think about how this would make you feel, that if the people that answered this survey, if they answered that the company goals were unimportant to them, that they did not feel their role was important enough to contribute. And, Brittany, you and I both have a manufacturing background in comms. And we've seen when employees truly feel disconnected from what they are doing to that corporate goal, that company goal, that big mission, what that does to them, but also what it does to them when they do see that line and they do see that connection between their job, their piece of what they do, and the impact that has on the overall business.
Couldn't agree more. I actually call that often the black hole of despair or the valley of despair, because there's always change happening and there's decisions being made. And when you don't feel like you're a part of that or being involved along the way, how can you get behind that end goal? I often recommend, because people are like, well, we don't know how to communicate what's going on and things are changing and it's hard to get to those folks on the plant floors. And I'm like, you just have to communicate, even if you don't have all the answers. Because I mean, that stat is sad to me, because I want to come to work feeling like I'm making a difference. And if you just have those two-way conversations and involve them in the decision making, it kind of helps you feel like you're a part of that change moving forward.
Yeah, I will admit, Brittany, I hate it when I hear people say that it's hard to communicate to those audiences, because that to me says what you're doing now is too easy. If what you're doing is like, oh, they have a laptop, oh, they have access, okay, we're communicating to them, then you're not even hitting that audience, let alone the people that it's too hard to reach. There are ways to do it. Sometimes it takes a little extra effort. Sometimes it takes an investment. Sometimes it takes some creativity
Right.
to bridge that final gap, but it's there. And when you bridge that connection, that's when the magic happens inside organizations.
Couldn't agree more.
Next slide, Lee. So, as communicators, we spend so desk-based people. I don't know why I do change voices when I say like what communicators say, but like desk-based employees need this, and deskless have this, and we put these on polarizing people. There's a common bond between it. Doesn't matter if you're desk-based or you're deskless. No one feels listened to. Like it's all basically identical numbers. Whether you're on the front lines and you're in healthcare and you're manufacturing, you're sitting in an office or you're working from home and you're in sales, nobody feels listened to. The employee voice is lost.
And I think that goes back to the last slide. They don't feel involved in the strategy, the business objectives, and they don't feel listened to. And so that also, the stat also makes me sad. So what can we do as communicators? And I think that goes back to some of the simple things that Chuck said, but also in the chat, having conversations, listening, asking people their opinions, involving a diverse group in conversations. So, but to your point, it's not a desk space versus deskless. We're just not feeling heard or involved.
Yeah, access doesn't impact this. So I would love to hear in the chat for people who are in that day-to-day practice of internal comms, how does your organization listen to employees, or how are you capturing employee voice out there? Because it's powerful. We see it all the time, those using First Up. I describe it as that employee-generated content, that employee sharing is that good, gooey stuff. It is that stuff that as communicators, we could never invent, we could never make up. We don't even know is happening. I got to work with a retailer who launched a platform during the pandemic, and it was something as simple as their CEO posted a video and he introduced himself to the organization. Humility. Introduced, I am Bruce, I'm the CEO, this is how long I've been here, wanted to meet all of you. Now, in the comments, introduce yourself to me. And Brittany, this was like comms gold in there, because people were talking about how they had worked there, some cases 30 plus years, some cases 3 months. Somebody was 16 and this was their first job. Somebody was 66 and this was their last job, and they didn't want to ever leave. Just amazing stories about how their coworkers are truly, they felt like they were more their family than their actual family, and like a support group. And again, as the comms team that were reading these things, the stories were just coming out of everywhere. And me, even being someone who doesn't even work for the company, I got emotional reading these stories from employees, because these were their words from their heart. And that's, again, the stuff that as communicators, it's tough to get that out of some, but once you open it up and people feel comfortable sharing, like that's when the healing starts to happen in there.
Yeah, and I love that it was very simple. The harder part was probably sharing your stories for some, but it was very simple for the CEO to introduce and say, "This is who I am. Tell me about you." So it opened that accessibility, but on a deeper level, like you said, it created healing, it created connection, it created inclusivity, and it's possible on a digital platform. You can see everybody's stories around the globe of how their workplace has made a difference. I think that's huge. That's a great story.
It was so cool. I will say it was overwhelming. They had more than 1,400 stories
Wow.
come in from employees. Now, clearly not everybody sent one in, but I guarantee you that just got people sharing and talking more, which is going to help grow culture inside organizations. I think we just have one more slide after this one before we just dig in deeper to the conversation. This is around now, where are people working? Now, first off, this is a very privileged conversation because not everybody has the ability to work from home. A nurse does not have the ability to work from home. So some people don't have that option. So we have to recognize that. But for those who do have the option to work from home, there's a lot of the reasons down below around why people prefer to work from home. Brittany, what I think is interesting here is look at that age 55 and up. I'm gonna take a big swipe at this and say that's probably the age group that is largely making the decisions around what are the plans with office space and workplaces and when do people come back and how do they use it. They're the ones that want to be back in there. So of course they're making that call. You can see it that I think the color's black. It is a black line that is half even the next age group, let alone the younger age groups. That's the challenge. So if you're this is where communicators are often in the room for some of these conversations, or you're sharing this news out with employees, this is a chance to hit pause and say, do we know how our employees are going to react to this? Have we asked our employees what they want out of this? What was your big takeaway, Brittany?
Yeah, I think that is a black bar. That bar just stood out, very profound. I think you're spot on. I think there's a generational difference, and which we talk about generations a lot, but in your case, they're making the decisions, and there's a disconnect, and so how maybe that goes back to that stat of they're not feeling listened to because they're saying for different reasons, I need that personal and professional balance. I still have childcare issues. I have safety concerns, whatever those, or I just prefer it. There's a lot out there, and they're not feeling heard potentially. And then others whose preferences or bias might tend towards, going back into the office might just be making those decisions in the silo. So I definitely saw that story come to life on this bar chart.
Yeah, to me, this is such a personal decision for employees. I get that there have to be policies and there have to be plans, but it's such a personal decision. For one person, working from home is the best place for them to be. For other people, working from home might not be the best place for them. When I think about when we were Social Chorus and we closed our office in San Francisco and everybody there went to work or went home to work. I mean, it didn't impact me any, so I just kept
Right.
working. But for some people, the office was a place for them to go. They might share an apartment. I heard of people like 3 people in a 2-bedroom and a couple that were now both working from home, and it was a 1-bedroom apartment in San Francisco. Like that's not ideal for working. But then you've got environments where that's not a safe place always for some
Hmm.
employees. So let's find out why going to the office is so important for some, or why staying home is so important for others, because I think it is such that personal conversation for employees.
I
So we
agree.
wanted to share, some of that research. You can go look at the whole thing. We've got it. We've got a global view of this research and a US focused research. You can go to bit.ly/commsHERO. Takes you straight to the research. Scroll through it at the bottom. You'll see links to the PDFs. Look for either the global side or the US side, and check that out. So yeah, we encourage you to see what this means to you and see what you can do at your organizations to improve. So Lee, if you don't mind taking the deck down, what Brittany and I are just going to start having a little bit of a conversation with everyone. I would love to hear, I'm going to ask Brittany this question, but I'd love for all of you in the chat to also answer it. If you share this research with your leadership and supervisors and managers, what do you think their response would be? Or what should their response be in this?
Should's good. I think should would be that they reevaluate there's a couple underlying themes. One is what they're offering for that wellness or mental health. And I think before they just jump to offering another program, they should listen. And so it's having an employee conversation, whether that's through a digital platform or a survey, but gathering those voices and saying, what do you need from us for wellness, from communications to feel more involved? And also, to the last point, what do you prefer and where do you work the best? Because there's a lot of opportunity for cultures to shift, but to keep their top talent and make a change for the good, I think.
Yeah, one of the other data points that we learned was about pretty much half. It was one on one side, one on the other, of people truly feeling valued at
Mhm.
work. That for a lot of employees, and I would say a massive percentage of them comes direct from their manager.
Right.
You might not always like what you're doing. You might not like what the company's doing. You might not see eye to eye with certain vision statements. But if you have a great relationship with your manager, you will still feel valued. You will still feel heard. And I think that speaks to that, are people being listened to? I think to managers and supervisors and leaders, what my partner Kristen Hancock, who spoke earlier in the week, uses this line. I'm going to attribute it to her, but she probably took it from somebody else, which is like, that's why you have two ears and one mouth. Like, we need to listen more to people. And I think as leaders, they feel like they need to be the ones sharing all the time and talking all the time, when in fact that needs to be cut back and they need to be listening more. We just saw the data. 7 out of 10 basically don't feel listened to. That's even worse than than the valued part.
Right.
But if people feel listened to, then they at least feel valued in that space.
Yeah, and when I've been asked before, when I was doing communications coaching, like, what should I do or how should I communicate? I always say, did you ask? Like, did you ask their preference? Did you find out if the person wants a weekly check-in? They prefer a phone call, Zoom. They need to meet in person once in a while when it's possible. It's as simple as finding out, what does your employee need from you, and vice versa. What does your leader need from you to also feel comfortable and have those open conversations?
Yeah, I think it's going to be especially interesting. The whole return to the office has been
Mhm.
delayed in a lot of places. I think when we all left the office during the pandemic, we thought, oh, this is just going to be a couple months.
Right.
And then it turned into a couple quarters, and then it turned into a year. And now it feels like it's turning into 2 years for some. So people are now getting settled into new habits and new ways of working. And I know now companies are like, they put out a plan and then the plan gets pushed out and then it gets changed and then it gets delayed. So, what's your recommendation there, Brittany, for how do we find out what employees really want from their employer when it comes to how they work and where they work?
I definitely think a quick survey, doesn't have to be very detailed, should be done, or even a couple, focus groups, get people on a Zoom call, get their opinions. But we need to have people heard and listened to. And I think there needs to be some flexibility, or you'll see what we're seeing, which is the great resignation, because people are like, well, I've rethought my life and I'll go look for something that fits my values or the work needs I have. And so I think asking employees, instead of just making those decisions in a bubble, is key. And I think Sophia agrees with me. Ask employees, listen and react. It's all about asking and listening. So love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, I've seen some. It doesn't always have to be like really serious either. These are
Mm,
these are important conversations, but I've seen some really great examples um, from Europe where companies have created very clever videos and very
mhm,
clever commentary around return to the office. Where the one example was like this little girl walking her dad to work, much like a
right,
parent would walk their child to school, and he's really nervous to go back, and she's like, oh, look, there's Tom from accounting, and they like look away from each other, and then the like HR person walks out and like welcomes him in, and he goes into the thing and starts crying right away, and no, she'll be back, and like to show like it is change, but
right.
we've a lot of workers have experienced that change through watching younger people go through it. Now we are also experiencing that abrupt change, and it's going to be rough for some employees out there. It's not going to be easy, but that doesn't mean we still can't use some humor
Yeah, I
for
love
that.
those videos. So they were. It's good to acknowledge that it is going to be tough, but we can do it in a funny way and come together and listen and understand what everyone's going through.
When we hear terms like, Brittany, like great resignation,
Mm,
I know we talked about that when we were prepping for this, and it's a pretty outlandish term, right? It sounds like everybody's quitting their job,
right.
everybody's resigning. That's not the case, but people are getting fed up with it. People are getting
Mhm.
burned out um, there. So I would love to hear, Brittany, how do you manage not being burned out? Like, what do you do to set those barriers? And I would love to hear examples in the chat from individuals about what you are doing when you start to feel that kick in. What's your remedy? What's your go-to to help yourself?
Yeah, I might need to ask the audience. I'm not very good at it, so I'm still learning. It's tough for me because as communicators, as the audience all is, I feel like you're a little bit on call, right? Especially during a pandemic when rules and policies are changing and you're writing and reading and reacting. But I think involving more people, being comfortable, setting your priorities and asking your leader when you need a break, I think goes back to that vulnerability. But it's definitely a work in progress for me,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't want to let people down. And so I'm sure others on this call feel that way too. So would love to hear if anyone, we got listening to music and a short walk outside. I do try to get my steps now to take a little break, take a lap around my alley. So, and hugging my kids.
Yeah.
I love that suggestion. I don't know, Chuck, how about you? You might be better at boundary setting than me. You told me
No,
that
it
today.
is. I
It's
think it's a
tough.
struggle for all of us. I
Yeah.
think it's a struggle for all of us, Brittany. And one of the things that I started doing during the pandemic was I realized I wasn't setting aside the time to do the right things.
Mm,
That I used to enjoy working out like midday. That was my like go-to time. And then all of a sudden, because now we see in this Zoom world that we're all in, like we're just call after call after call after call. I wasn't making that time anymore, and the time wasn't available. I didn't have the boundaries in place. So I made the time. I now go at 6 a.m. to go to the gym. I had to make the time for my health to make that
right.
happen. The other thing that's had a great impact on me was during the pandemic, we've adopted a few rescue dogs
Oh,
during that
yay.
time because you know who doesn't care about your work schedule? Dogs.
Your dogs.
They have nothing to do. So
I don't
going
need any
on
more
walks
cats, but I like it.
and some snuggles on the couch and some pets, and they come and check on you and try to steal your lunch, and like it's that grounding
Right.
of things out there. I think that's been for me, and also experimenting with some new things. So through Ecology community, Kristen and I founded, we've now started working with a breathing coach
Oh,
to learn how to breathe and learn how breathing can help you reset stress levels. So box breathing and some other things that we're going to be doing. Even doing that helps your body just hit reset. So yeah, I love seeing like people
I
dogs do
love the
know.
pets.
Yeah.
I lock the cats out, but usually they're snuggling. They do help. So, and I'm a huge tennis player, as you know, and so that's those hitting those balls help with my stress relief. But someone said it in the chat, and you said it too. Sometimes you choose what to say yes or no to, and you reference a workout. But sometimes I think in my head, even for work, am I working on things that aren't a priority even to my boss? So having again those conversations, like
Hmm.
I spent a lot of time on this, and it might not even matter. So me working on the right things, both personally and professionally,
Yep.
clearing that communication, I think is important. And I'm seeing some quiet hours and some. I really like that concept, and I know at First Step when I came here, I really appreciated our social distance days because it's rare you could
Hmm.
truly take a vacation. At least my personality sees the emails pile up and wanting to respond. So I love that once a month we take a day to everybody. Our company's closed, and I've seen some universities doing that too. It makes you
Hmm.
feel a bit of relief to take a break.
Yep. Yeah, I think a couple things on that. One is having that one Friday a month where the company takes off. That then, like you said, Slack isn't piling up, email isn't piling
Right.
up. And manage it, and what you do at that time is up to you. You can choose to spend that time however you want. People post and share photos of what they're doing on that time, but everybody's spending it in the way that they want, which I
Mhm.
think is awesome. And yes, Helen, I see your chat. Pet snuggles are essential stress relief, and they're also amazing listeners. They're the best listeners. We talk about maybe that'd be a great thing, Brittany, how leaders should be more like pets. Like, what are the pet behaviors that we should have
Oh yeah,
leaders?
that could be your next podcast. I like it.
I did see we had a question come in.
Mhm.
What makes a leader an emotionally intelligent leader? What's a few words that come to mind for you there, Brittany?
I think that first self-awareness, and that it can be hard. So it's a great question. And so sometimes a leader needs to spend the time gathering feedback from people to help with that self-awareness. I always say, we have our personal perceptions of ourselves, but what else, how do we come across? So that self-awareness is key. We already talked about listening. So spending the time to hear and putting ourselves in other people's shoes. I love this Brene Brown video. I will steal it from her all day long, where it talks about the difference between empathy. People often think just because they're hearing that they're understanding, and understanding is not the same as empathy. Oh, yep, I've been through that too. Oh, yeah, it's tough. It's not the same as sitting with somebody and saying, I hear you. I understand that you're going through a tough time.
Yep.
A lot of times people just want to be heard and understood, which is
Yep.
completely the same personally and also professionally. I always say during large change initiatives, I love to do change sessions where you just help people share how they're feeling about it. And it doesn't mean they need an action or things to change. They just want to feel heard and understood. And I think that's a couple things that come to mind with helping with emotional intelligence for a
Yeah.
leader.
The biggest word for me here is vulnerability.
Yep.
I mentioned that CEO talking about mental health, like things of being vulnerable. They're not superheroes. They might think they are. We might put them on a pedestal like they are.
Right.
I love superheroes as much as the next person out there, but every superhero has weaknesses. And being vulnerable is what makes everyone so much more relatable. So if our leaders are more vulnerable and show that emotional intelligence, the stronger the connection they will then build with employees. And then likewise, employees will build with their leaders. So I see that
Yep.
Sophia has joined to like pull us off stage. I think here soon.
Not yet. We have got 5 minutes, but I just wanted to, mention some of the comments, which I know you've been going through anyway, which is great. But just on behalf of like the team here, because we've been listening to every word and we've all got different experiences. So I wanted to say about mine really, which was, it's not always been the case, and I'm sure it won't always be the case, but at the moment, I have got a really good employer, because I'm really open about the fact that I suffer with OCD, and it took me years to be open about that, and I have done, and they have been fantastic. So they actually listened to what I needed, and they've put all those things in place, even really simple things like you were saying. It doesn't have to be anything big or major, but one of them was having a standing desk. And that is in place now. So I've got one at home and one in the office. And I used to be one of those people that thought you had to go to the office and be there to be doing your work and stuff. And then obviously when lockdown forced us to work from home, it was a life changer for me, because like you were saying, Chuck, about making the time to go to the gym and things like that, they were all the things that we probably always say, we haven't got time, we're too busy. I learned how to garden, cook, and made time for the gym, and it's just been great for work-life balance. But I know it's not like that all the time. So one of the questions we had here as a team was, you talked about boundaries and setting those boundaries, which I think is really important, but how do you get your leaders and your employers to also stick to those boundaries that you've put in place? Because that's the difficult part that we thought.
You want to go first, Brittany?
Sure, it is very hard. But first of all, Sophia, thanks for being vulnerable and sharing that beautiful story. So I'm going to start crying. So yeah, didn't expect it to be an emotional episode, but that's the first key to communication. So being vulnerable, and if we can manage up and walk the talk with our employers and leaders, we can do the best we can and hope for it. I also think that giving that feedback, providing it to our leaders, having candid conversations doesn't ensure they'll change, but at least sharing is key to one, and being vulnerable like that and asking, because if you don't ask, you don't know their response. So, and some of your, like you mentioned, the request of a stand-up desk, that helped you tremendously, and a company might be thinking there's these huge things they have to put in place, but if we spend the time talking to our employees, there could be some very simple changes that could be made to help people in their day-to-day lives. And I think that really trying from our end to have those conversations with employers is key, and hoping they listen. Also sharing some of the data that we find out there. I think it's out there. There's so much now about how we need it. And if your leaders are more logic-based, sharing, getting some of that in front of them and helping influence those conversations.
I think it's important to get feedback from employees, but also, to your point, what you mentioned, Sophia, again, which is thanks for sharing that. Like, I think about it when we were all in person and you would sign up for an event, and I would ask, do you have dietary restrictions? Do you need assistance and blah, blah, blah. Like, we shouldn't have to ask people those things. Like, we should make it accessible for all from the get-go. We shouldn't need to have people self-identify those things. Like, we should just make everything accessible and give a variety of workstations, a variety of work environments for anyone. But ultimately, it's going to be a part of that culture there where employees can speak up, and they can speak up without the fear of retribution, without the fear of being singled out. And Sophia, you called out, you're fortunate to work for an organization that wants to hear, that wants to do the right thing. Unfortunately, for some, that's not always the case at a lot of organizations, but the more voices that are out there and create a chorus of feedback, it's hard not to listen at that point.
Be the commsHEROs, be the champions of the cause.
Absolutely.
Well, there's a Simon Sinek quote, which is, be the leader you wish you had.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have the leadership, be that leader that you think the organization needs, because you will then stand out and be that voice and that person for others too. Yeah.
And I think you mentioned before as well that if you don't, the end result is probably people will leave, because I've got a good employer now. I in the past, I haven't always. And when I have been open, you don't get the supportive reaction. And then all you do is become dissatisfied and leave.
Right. And that's what we're seeing.
Yeah.
Yep, that's what we're seeing.
I hope you realize that everybody in this chat probably want you as employers. So you're going to probably have an avalanche of CVs.
You know what? We've got some job openings at First Up.
So go check it out.
It's growing.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Are you going to be sticking around on the tables to chat to anyone about if they've got any questions? Because I know there was a lot of comments in there, and I'm sure people will want to talk more.
So I'm gonna offer something up to this team. I would say connect with Brittany and myself on LinkedIn. We're both active there. We actually have our company all hands call that started, so that we can go join that to hear what's happening within our own organization. We do that weekly, so everybody's aware, everybody has a chance to talk and be on there. So we're going to jump and go do that. But certainly connect with us on LinkedIn, and we're happy to connect and answer any questions anyone has.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yep, thank you.
Can we all show some emoji love?
I love the emojis on
I know.
here.
Thank you.
You've had a lot.
Asif knows that. I love seeing those things pop up. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
I do know who Duran Duran are, so yeah.
Thank you, Sophia. Thanks for to have that awkward moment this year.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I've just got to quickly mention a couple of things.
Sure.
So we are running competitions. So if everyone wants to tag your quotes, your experiences of today, share your stories from these sessions, any photos, please tag in #commsHERO, and we're giving away Sharpies, diaries, vouchers for Amazon, Krispy Kreme, pets at home, so get your pets involved as well. And also tonight, the after party that we've been talking about all week, it starts from 8 p.m. It's free, so you can share that with other people in your networks as well, so they don't have to have registered for commsHERO as in a ticket holder, but they do need to register for the party tonight. We're all staying here until about 10 o'clock. Don't feel sorry for us, because we're getting a takeout and we're going to party. So come and join us.
I'm not surprised to hear there's Krispy Kreme, because I do know Asif is a big Krispy Kreme donut fan. So it's good to hear that brand staying true to that.
Yeah. Thanks again to both of you, Brittany and Chuck, and to First Up for supporting commsHERO.
Thank you.
Thank you.